Welcome to Lift Your Story podcast with guest Annmarie Kelly, author, lifestylist, and couples coach. Hi, everyone. I am Lorianne. I am that gal from Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, and I am with.
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas. Welcome to our Lift Your Story podcast.
In this episode, we welcome Annmarie Kelly. She is an author, lifestylist, and couples coach. Thank you so much for being with us today. And you've got a really interesting story we can't wait to hear.
I'm so glad to be with the two of you today. Thank you for having me.
Okay, I have to admit now, I've never met anyone that's been married to the same person 7 times. So the most I've ever heard is 3 times. So how in the world did this happen?
Well, Roy, how it started out was, it started before I even met my now spouse, Joseph. And what happened was I grew up in a really strict Italian Catholic background, and I was raised to be the good girl. And I know a lot of your listeners will understand that means you go to school and then you get married and you buy a house and you have kids, and you buy a bigger house and you have more kids, and then I guess you retire. And I was on track for that. And then I got engaged to some man. And then what happened was something happened that I thought, I don't think this is the right thing. I don't think this is how it should be. And we talked about it. We went out one night and we talked about it. And I said, well, I can't marry you under this thought process. So I gave him back the ring. And that night I went home and told my parents. And my father went ballistic because, I was on good girl track. And suddenly I'm like, wait, something. And he never thought anything except that the guy broke up with me. So he wanted to sue for breach of promise. And when I stopped crying, and after I thought about it a couple of days, I thought, if he was going to sue, well, first of all, I don't think anybody got sued for breach of promise in the whole 20th century. And I understand now, being older, that he was just being sympathetic. It was his way of being sympathetic. But the truth is, if he was going to sue anybody for breach of promise, it would have been me. So what happened after that was that I kind of went into the valley. Like a lot of times, that's what we women do. When we're trying to deal with something, we go into the valley. And when I came back up, all that good girl stuff was broken. I thought, it occurred to me that my father, and I know my father loved me, as a daddy's girl. If my father couldn't think past his own stupid agenda to know what was good for me, there was never going to be another living person who was ever going to know what was right for me but me. That made a huge shift in my life I was in my 20s. But, a lot of women come to that conclusion when they're in their 40s or 50s, but I was lucky enough to come to that conclusion in my 20s. And so at that point I started, and all my girlfriends were getting married, but my cousins were getting married. And every wedding, it was like, so are you dating anyone? When are you getting married? And, eventually I came to a point to tell them that sometimes you could tell it's like they were needling me. I said, well, tell you the truth, I'd rather be an old maid than wish I were one. And I'm telling you that I tell all the single girls that now because they love it. Because single girls aren't getting married at 22 and 25. They're getting married at 28 and 30 and 33. Mm-hmm. So they love hearing that. And it stopped people from asking any more questions. So what I started to notice, though, as my girlfriends got married, they went from happy girls, and, everything is they met somebody, it was happy, happy, happy. And then they got engaged, happy, happy, happy. Then they got married, happy, happy, happy. And then it wasn't so happy, happy, happy. And I watched them as strong, powerful women give up their personal power for the sake of that relationship. And the more I saw that happen, and some of the girls got divorced, but most of them, as good Catholic girls, I was a Catholic school teacher, so a lot of my friends were Catholic school teachers. In the best good Catholic school, they did not get divorced. And I thought, yeah, that's not what I want. So So as I got older, I thought, well, I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be a happy person no matter what, even if I don't meet anybody. Although I did want a partner, because I think life is really hard to go through it by yourself. So then time moved along, and then I met Joseph. And we were kind of hanging out. Then we started dating. And then at some point, he started to ask me about, he started talking marriage. I was like, uh-oh. So well, at the beginning, I didn't even answer his question. I said, I think we should buy a house. I was in the real estate business by that time. I knew how to get into buying a house. I knew how to get out of it. So I felt pretty safe. We moved in 1987. We met in 1985. We moved in 1987. And in the summer of 1988, I asked Joseph, his birthday was coming up, and I said, what do you want for your birthday? He said, I want to get married. Now in my head, I'm thinking, oh, snookered. We're living together. Isn't that enough? But to him, I said, look, how about a watch? I'll get you a really nice watch. How about a watch for your birthday? He said, I really want to get married. So I thought about it and I prayed about it. I took long walks. And finally, a couple of weeks later, I said to him, look, I said, I have an idea. I'm sure, and please understand, Roy and Laurie, that it wasn't anything to do with Joseph. He was then, and he still is, a really good man. And I knew he would be a good partner. But that whole get married till you're dead did not appeal to me at all. And the worst of it was getting married till you're dead and becoming like some of the women that I saw who were angry and resentful and unhappy. So I said, I know I could do 5 years. I'm positive I could do 5 years with you. So let's do this. We'll get married for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, if we still like each other, we'll get married again. And if we could do our marriage that way, I'm in. And Joseph, like, he tells me now that he was like a little skeptical, like, what game was I trying to run on him? He wasn't sure, but but being married was really important to him. So 6 weeks later, we got married. And of course, everybody thought I was pregnant because they thought it was a shotgun wedding, but it wasn't. And so that's what we did. At the end of our first 5 years, to tell you the truth, Laurie and Roy, I didn't really have a sense of what the 5-year marriage was at that point. But we finished 5 years and we still liked each other, so we got married again. And in that second marriage, not unusually, if you in the life of couples, we hit a wall. Like, we ran into a problem, it was a wall. And for my teacher background, I said, oh, I can fix this. And as the months went on, I wasn't fixing it, and I realized I couldn't. So I said to Joseph, we need to get help. And he didn't really want to go for therapy. In fact, he later told me that if it wasn't for the 5-year marriage, he probably would not have gone for therapy. And I know if it wasn't for the 5-year marriage, our marriage would not have survived. So we did go for therapy. We learned a lot. We both learned a lot about ourselves and about each other and about partnership. At the end of that 5 years, by then I knew enough that I actually could put a little course of study together. We started having family meetings, and we decided at that point we would get married again. And that course of study, that process that I put in place at the end of our second marriage, is what we still use today. And so what we do is we start our marriage with a set of goals and a set of agreements. And the agreements are really pretty important. And then we go through that 5 years. And at the end of that 5-year period, we go back and we say, so in this marriage, what went right? What didn't go so well? How did we fix it? And where do we want to go going forward? And do we still want to go together? So far we do. And then deciding that we want to still go together, then we have to figure out how we're going to go together and be able to, for me to satisfy my goals, you to satisfy your goals. What agreements do we have to make between us to make that work for us? So that's how we do it. And I'll tell you this, every single one of our marriages has been different. You know, there was the marriage where we started our businesses, the marriage where during one marriage we were caregivers for both our mothers, and they both died during that marriage. And that was very interesting at the end of that marriage, because we weren't the kids anymore. We were, like I've noticed, and I've talked with other people about this, that when your last parent dies, it shifts something inside your head. Because, you realize you're next up at bat. So
oh, interesting.
So that conversation at the end of that marriage was very interesting. And then when we restart our marriage, we don't renew our vows, because we have new agreements. We make new agreements. And we have a ceremony. We don't always have a party, but we always have a ceremony. And then we start fresh. It's a new beginning.
So you don't actually get a divorce and remarry. You just kind of like, you're renewing your next 5 years with the new agreement.
Is it a contract? Yeah, I'm curious about that too. Is it legal?
Yeah, we do contract with each other in writing, and we don't take it to the local courts and file. Though I knew a couple who actually did do that. They actually filed with the local courts. But we have it in writing, and then we refresh ourselves with that whenever we have a family meeting. We go back and look at the things that we talked about doing, and we really make an effort to stay true to what it is that we said we would do, for together, separately, and together, and for each other. And it's interesting.
It's like chapters of a book. Like you've got the one chapter, and then the next chapter where people talk about, what they say in the 20s to the 30s, 30s to 40s, 40s to 50s. I mean, they do it in 10-year increments. A lot of them are telling me, I'm, as of next year, going to be in my last quarter. Because they do it by quarters, right? Most people write about it to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 80, and anything above 80 is a bonus. But it just reminds me of that in our own lives, really, what you're talking about is what we each individually is worthwhile to do just for ourselves, right? You do your 5 year, and it's not, you're not going to have to say that, oh no, in 20 years I'm going to be there. I think it's interesting that you've got a nice 5 years, and that's doable, right? And
for me it was doable. And I don't think Joseph at the very beginning, he wasn't the kind of person who used to set goals, but to set them down in writing. But there's something that goes on in his head that when he wants something, he somehow gets it in his head to make a plan to do it. Unlike me, who I'm a little bit more process oriented, and I have to go A, B, C, D. But the one thing that Joseph says, Laurie, that I always think is interesting about the 5-year marriage, because Joseph is a massage therapist. And so he has a lot of women on his table on a regular basis. So he hears a lot of stories. And what he's come to understand about the 5-year marriage is that nobody gets left behind. Like I don't get left behind in the things I want, and he doesn't get left behind in the things he wants. But it doesn't always come as fast maybe as we would like it to come. Or as a couple, the things that we planned don't always come as fast as we say, oh, and by next year, blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't always come by next year, but we both are clued into making that happen. And there was a man who said at one time, and I loved it. He said that the secret to his marriage was that he and his spouse wanted more for each other than they wanted for themselves. And so I often think that that's a secret to a good marriage. When you're not always thinking, I want this and I want this, and I don't care what happens. I need to make this happen. I was thinking that recently with Tom Brady and football, that I wrote an article about it, that it's like, so she put her career on the back burner, and they both had age-sensitive careers. And she put her career on the back burner to be a homemaker, and a mom. And he was fulfilling all the things he needed to do. And in one interview, he said, there's things that she wants to do. And I thought, you think? You think after all these years, there might be things she wants to do for her life? So I think it was good that he retired, because he's a GOAT. He's the greatest of all time. It's her turn.
It's interesting you were mentioning, like when I got married, it was the late teens, early 20s. We were all getting married, started having kids. My kids, they got married in their, early 30s to 40s. And they started having kids mid to late 30s, early 40s. When I go out on the soccer fields and stuff and see all these, I'm like, oh my gosh, my kids were in high school when I was that age.
Yeah.
But are you seeing, or let me back up, do you work with people, say, women that are thinking about getting married, and do you kind of like premarital counseling?
Yes, I like working with women who are single. Maybe they're in a management or executive position, and they're putting off marriage because they think they can't juggle the two of them. Well, most of that's not really what they think. What they think is, I don't want to give up my independence. I've worked really hard to get where I am, and I don't want to give it up just to be a homemaker. And not that there's anything wrong with being a homemaker, but that's not the route that they chose in life. And what I hear sometimes is, I love my mother, I love my father, I don't want my mother's marriage, because, as what I said earlier, so many of these women watch their mothers give up their personal power for the sake of the relationship. So I work with those women to help them understand about the 5-year marriage and how they don't have to give up their personal power, that they can still be independent. And what I like to explain is that there's an interdependence, so that, as Joseph would say, nobody's left behind. So I said, but they see all of that. They don't, that stranglehold of being married till you're dead doesn't appeal to these younger people. And that's why they like the idea of the 5-year marriage.
I'm curious though, does that just dissolve at the end of the 5 years? Like if you decide, hey, you know what, we don't want this anymore. There's an understanding, because sometimes you're building assets together. I mean, it's not just a simple thing being married. I mean, it's not like, hey, let's get married for 5 years. I mean, there's got to be contractual agreements where, whatever I work for is mine and yours, or we do a 50-50 split. But you understand, like, I went through a divorce. It was not pretty at all. And even if we said it was going to, we agreed to certain things if it should ever happen, because we knew that was a possibility. When it comes down to the end of a marriage, and I would think even a 5-year marriage or a 10 or a second 5-year marriage or a third 5-year marriage, how do you go beyond that? Like, let's say at the end of 5 years, and I'm sorry for going on, but these are things going through my head while you're talking about this. At the end of the 5 years, you want to marry him and he does not, like, you would love to remarry him and he does not want to remarry you. I mean, there's got to be issues there. That I love that you've done it 7 times, but in the cases, I'm kind of being a little bit of a, what is it called? I'm trying to be, seeing the other side of it, a little bit of an instigator here. But those are the questions I would ask you going, yeah, I don't really want to be married. I don't know if I can do the full plan of all that, but what happens after those 5 years? That I'm just curious.
Yeah, after those 5 years, it would, in my case, I'm legally married in the state of Pennsylvania. So it would be a legal divorce.
Okay.
But the idea of, and you're right, you have assets together. So at the beginning of the marriage, you would list what your assets are. Mm-hmm. In my case, I owned a house before I got married. Mm-hmm. And so that was a big deal. And in 1985, there weren't a lot of women who were even able to get credit, let alone buy credit to buy a house. So that house was a big deal for me. So that was something that when we moved in together, I rented that property, but it was always understood that was my house. So if anything were to happen, that was not part of anything. It was not a joint asset. And other things that we have in writing, for example, we both have businesses. So we have made each other, you kind of have to think out the legal pieces of this. It gets a little complicated, but I'm a partner in his business and he's a partner in my business.
Oh, yeah.
And we are listed on each other's, we have a bunch of bank accounts. So we are listed on each other's bank accounts, but he has a bank account that is just his, and I have a bank account that is just mine.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's stuff that I want to do that, and my example always is I didn't get a college degree till 20 years ago, which was a little bit later than when I graduated high school. I was one of those women who went back in midlife. And my agreement with Joseph was that I wouldn't use house money to pay my tuition. But I had a successful business, so that wasn't an issue, but that was always understood that whatever I paid for tuition was coming out of my pocket. I always keep money in an account that Joseph always laughs, because at the beginning it was psychologically, it was important to me to have enough money that if I wanted to be in the UK tomorrow and decided I wanted to go live there, I had enough money to do that. I think it's always good for a woman to have her own money. Yeah. I never went to the UK to do that. I still have that same little pot of money, but he has that same little pot of money too, which I encouraged him to make sure he put aside. And in his case, he took up playing the guitar about 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah. He played a long time ago, but he taught himself. So he decided he was going to take lessons. And so he wanted to buy a guitar, and they're not inexpensive, but he bought $400, $500. But at one point he said, I've had this great guitar that I want to get. He said, it's $3,000. I'm like, are you nuts? I had no part of my brain that he wouldn't have it if we had to take it out of house money. But it was his money. I'm like, I think you're nuts for spending $3,000 on a guitar. But it's your money, do what you want with it. So the 5-year marriage enables us, the way we have set up our legal stuff, we still have some autonomy within the process.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks for answering that.
It's like, for me, I've been married a couple of years, and we don't have a written contract. But when we were dating, we agreed to be open, honest, and transparent. We would not lie to each other, would not keep secrets from each other. Then once we got married, our deal was we would never be unfaithful. If we got to that point, we would get a divorce. And then we've lived by that the whole time, so that was kind of our quote agreement, I guess, if you want to say.
Well, yeah, that is exactly. And you know what, Roy, I want to give your viewers something that I think will hold them in great stead. I look at the 5-year marriage starting with the ABCs: agreements, boundaries, and compromise. And it isn't always exactly that. It's the power of agreements. You and your spouse made an agreement about something that you have decided to live by. Mm-hmm. What I've noticed a lot of times with so many people, and mostly I talk to women, so mostly it's women who I have this conversation with, that one example is I'll ask them, I talk about unspoken agreements. So I'll say, well, do you send out cards? Do you send out birthday cards? And, oh, yeah, of course I do. To your family? Yes. Do you send them to his family? Well, yeah, of course. Did you ever have a conversation about who was going to send out the birthday cards and the Christmas cards? No. Well, that's an unspoken agreement. Now, that might be one that you really like, the job you really like to do, but if you have one unspoken agreement, I'll bet you have at least 5 more that are unspoken agreements that you got shoved into and may not like. When you have a lot of unspoken agreements, that ends up creating a level of resentment for either party. So I talk about the power of agreements. A is for the power of agreements, and B is for the bonus of boundaries. I have a boundary within my relationship where nobody's allowed to yell at me. You know, I'm a full-grown woman. I really busted my butt for a lot of my life to be independent and to do the right thing. So nobody should be yelling at me. Now, sometimes in an argument, and you know, I come from that Italian background, it can get loud. But there's a point in time where sometimes it happens when we're having an argument, and then I feel like Joseph's yelling at me. And I just say, stop, you're yelling at me. Now he knows that's a boundary. So we stop the argument at that point, take a breather, and go back to it another time. In his case, one of his boundaries is he's very sensitive to being belittled. Sometimes I do that and I don't even realize that's what I'm doing. He said, you're belittling me. Again, that's a stop, because it's not my intention. Belittling him is not my intention. So we have those boundaries. So B is the bonus of boundaries, and C is the curse of compromise. Because a lot of times people say, well, marriage is all about compromise. Well, I never believed that. And I didn't want to believe it at the beginning, because I saw so many of my girlfriends compromise their way into personal oblivion. So my example for that always is, maybe Joseph wants me to go to dinner with his family, and I know his mother hates me. So I'm like, I don't want to go. I'm not going to compromise myself into going just because he wants me to go. However, I will, but I know it's important to him. So I will negotiate with him something that if I'm going to do this, then I would like him to do this. So rather than compromise, and then I'm going and I'm sitting at dinner and the mother's giving me daggers, and in real life she has passed on. So this is a for instance, but I'll go and I'll paste, but I could go and paste a smile on my face, be pleasant, be really nice to everybody, because I would know that next week I'm going to be at the beach with my girlfriends, sucking down some drinks, because that's what I've negotiated out. Or something.
I was going to say, I was going to joke around and say, how big is your bank account?
Yeah, really.
Negotiate the money, then, you know, just keep, I'm sorry, I know, and I understand that, like, there are, you know, the compromises that you have to make. I never thought, though, never would I thought of negotiating.
You know what, Lori? Men do. Men, like, there's something about the way that men are raised that they very often think about negotiating, and women almost never do. And so that's why that's why I call it the curse of compromise, because I've seen so many of my girlfriends and so many women. You know, I've been working with women for over 20 years with women's empowerment, and I hear their stories. I'm like, well, but so what did you get in return for doing whatever? So they'll say, I'm really angry about it. So what did you negotiate in return? What do you mean negotiate? Well, if you just gave that up, then
yeah, but
angry, you just gave it up.
Be careful of having a negotiation and you go through with your side of it and the other person doesn't, because I did negotiate certain things. I don't want to say anything negative or anything, but in the end, so we agreed those terms, but my terms were not met. So I met his, but then mine weren't met. And that's really disturbing. And then what do you do? Do you walk away from it? At that point, I was thinking of it because I was so upset that negotiation person. You said this was going to be the deal. You promised that, yes, if we do this for you, you'll do this for me. And it was business, but it was fair. It was a fair exchange. And there was a part of me, like you said, you get frustrated. I was thinking of like the run the other way until, you know, I really couldn't because I got pregnant. So then I just stuck it out.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, yes, I agree with the negotiation. We don't think about it, but what we don't think about even more is when your side of the negotiation is failed upon and not brought through. What do you do then? You know, yeah.
Annmarie, Lorianne makes me negotiate all the time.
I do.
And see, I think that's good. And I think women need to get better at negotiating and being serious about it, because I spoke to a woman back in November, and she said, and she was explaining about the agreement that her spouse made. She was talking to me about doing a reset, and she said, yeah, and she was explaining that he agrees to things, and so she does her part and he doesn't do his part. Well, so why do you keep negotiating with him?
Really?
Yeah. And that's,
and then you just need to say, when he wants something, say, you haven't delivered on the last negotiation. I'm not doing this again. What do you think I am, stupid?
and there's a bit of a fear too, though, because I mean, in my case, you know, we had moved to a new place. And then there was my fear of failure because we had just been married. And so I let that negotiation failure go. And instead of, it might have been a whole, and I don't like what ifs, but it might have been a whole different story if I just gotten on the plane and gone back home and said, call me when you want to make this happen. I wasn't a strong enough person back then, but I'll tell you today, I would do that.
Because you're a smarter person and you feel more, you know, you're more self-actualized.
Yes. Yes.
More confident, more empowered.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, I don't think the 5-year marriage is for everybody, because I don't think everybody can handle it. I think that you have to have some two people who are strong and that want for each other as much as they want for themselves. But I don't think we have moved past the idea that women are more likely to give in, and not in every case. I've seen marriages where it's the other way, that it's the woman who is stronger, more demanding, or whatever you want to say, and the man gives in all the time. That's not healthy. That's not interdependence.
Yeah, I feel his pain.
Yeah.
Roy, he's being a twit. I feel his pain. And from your Facebook posts, I get it, Roy.
Yeah.
And you know what? He's totally joking, because he and Barbara have a great marriage, and we just love talking about that. And you know, 50 years, much different than what my parents, and my mother was Italian, by the way, so I think it's kind of cute when you're talking about that. I was brought up Catholic as well, and there was, unlike, you know, Roy was saying, if there was fighting, you heard the fighting, it was there. But it gave me a realization that, you know, they weren't hiding behind closed doors. I knew the reality of marriage, and I went in that way. But I'll tell you something, when it came down to the kids, my parents were united, and that was so important. Don't you say anything about mom, don't you say anything about dad. You're not getting away with it. You say something about dad, dad's going to protect her, the other way around. And that's what I loved about it, is they put each other first. No matter how they fought, in the end, they were number ones to each other.
And you know what, Lori, I think that very often doesn't happen in a lot of relationships once the kids come along. And a lot of times what I see happen is that suddenly the woman starts focusing everything on the kids. Yep. And the two of them don't make time for each other. There was a man I talked to, and this is not exactly the same thing, but they had 3 kids, and one of them died. And you know, and there's no way of getting over that. You know, you can't get over that. But they did all the right things. They did their grieving period. They saw a grief counselor, and you know, they were able to move past it enough that they had another child. But because of the death of the one child, they put all their energy into the 3 kids that they had, and suddenly they fell apart. Mm-hmm. So when I talked to him, he was looking for a reset, because he said, I think we forgot who we are as a couple. Mm-hmm. So they had to go back and think about and rethink that. I have something called the marriage curiosity conversation. And I have one for people who are just at the beginning, and one for couples who are thinking about doing a reset. And it's a free download on my website that helps people to helps couples, because sometimes you sit, there's a woman who told me recently, and she said, so what are we supposed to talk about? Like, we're going to go and have this family meeting. What are we supposed to talk about?
If we're going to go for dinner, what are we supposed to talk about?
Well, but you know what, Laura?
Really?
I have to tell you, never do it over dinner. What I always tell, first of all, Joseph,
When they lose themselves, right? When you do end up, you know, sometimes you've been so into the kids that when you go for dinner, you don't even know what to talk to your spouse about.
that's true. And for Joseph and I, I'm very big on the family meeting, and I'm very big on taking the family meeting out of the house, because there were too many times when Joseph and I would get together to have a conversation, and then he would get angry or I would get angry. And I would storm upstairs and turn on TV, and he would leave the house. And if you take it out to like Starbucks or a Panera or something like that, you are less likely to have that happen. You are more likely to sit there. You don't want to raise your voice because there's other people. You don't want to storm out because there's other people. So you're more likely to sit and finish your meal. And maybe you don't talk for a couple minutes, but eventually you start having like a bit of a conversation. So it's sort of like smooths things over a little bit. And and maybe you decide at that point, we need more time to think about this. Let's put it on the back burner and we'll talk about it the next time. So I think family meetings, to me, are crucial, because when you're going to have a curiosity conversation or you're going to have something that needs to be talked about. And, you know, sometimes Joseph and I just have family meetings because there's a lot of crap around the house that needs to get done and it's not getting done. So you know, we have to sit down and say, here are the things, you know, the house is falling apart. Here are the 5 things that we need to do to fix it, and who's going to do what. Yeah. But a lot of times it's like something's going on in one of our businesses or with our individual families or something like that. It's just easier to take it out of the house because you're more likely. Sometimes we'll go to McDonald's or, you know, like one of the breakfast fast food places and take a sandwich to the park and have our family meeting there.
Nice.
Annmarie, how can our listeners reach out to you?
They can find me at Annmarie at annmariekelly.com. They can go on my website at annmariekelly.com, and there's a lot of information on my blog. They can download the Curiosity Conversation, and it's a free download, so you're welcome to it. And if they want to reach me, as I said, Annmarie at annmariekelly.com. What
about your books? Where can they find your books?
Oh, thank you for asking, Roy. The 5-Year Marriage, the 5-Year Marriage and Victorious Woman are both available on Amazon. They are both available in paperback and in Kindle format.
Okay, great, perfect.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for this. Really appreciate you being on our show.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much for having me. You're a good host, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to meet you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.